Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Laura, what we have done today is making sure that we're having both a male and a female voice, so a male ally along with a woman who's advocating for equality. So I'm Lauren, I'm People for Liberty, and I understand that you were roped into this by David on Twitter, so God bless him. He is a strong advocate for us. So I appreciate you taking a chance and saying, all right, I'll talk to these crazy people. So.
No, happy to do it. I'm always all in when it comes to talking about anything that has to do with liberty. So.
Excellent. Well, Colin, how about I turn this over to your very capable hands as our male ally, my friend?
All right, that sounds good. Miss Laura, I'm excited to talk to you.
Hey, Colin.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
I'm guessing you're not getting caught up in hurricane or storm weather if you're up in Nebraska, huh?
No, it's just hot here. Although I will note that the current big hurricane is Hurricane Laura, so that's kind of cool, I guess.
Well, there you go. It's always fun to be included in these things.
Yeah.
So you were a state senator from Nebraska, right? Unless I'm mistaken.
Yep.
Tell us just a little bit about who you are and what brought you here and how you're involved in the liberty movement.
Sure. Well, I took sort of an unconventional approach to the Libertarian Party. Maybe I've always thought of myself as sort of a libertarian, but a small L libertarian. Back in my childhood, I'm 58 years old, so I'm one of the grandmas of the liberty movement. And so back in the 60s, when I was growing up, and 70s. My parents were very involved in the Republican Party. They were Goldwater Republicans, and I was one of those kids that was a real political nerd. I loved getting involved in politics. I loved doing things. I loved carrying the signs around at the county banquets and things like that. And then I did something crazy, fell in love and got married. And my interest in activist politics sort of waned for a while. Went to college, kind of over the course of 11 years, studied political science, which was sort of my original plan. But my original plan was to go to law school afterwards. My husband was in the military. He was a Navy physician. So we had a couple of duty stations, and we were in Memphis just long enough for me to finish my bachelor's degree. And then we were going to be there for, another 2 years. And so I decided, well, let's work on this master's degree. So I got a master's degree in political science while we were there. And when the Navy time started doing some teaching, and really took a real academic approach to political science at that point. When my husband's Navy time was up, we decided we wanted to move back to Nebraska. By that time, we had I guess about 6 years old at the time, our oldest daughter. And we really wanted to, we'd both grown up in Nebraska. We were high school sweethearts. And we really wanted to get back to a point of being close to family and friends. We'd both grown up around our grandparents, and we wanted our kids to grow up around their grandparents as much as possible too. So there was an opportunity for a medical practice for my husband to come back here, about 50 miles from our hometown. So we've over the last we've been here 25 years now. So over the last 25 years, our parents, my kids' grandparents, have had lots of opportunities to see their softball and baseball games and go to their music concerts and things like that. But I went back to graduate school, worked on my PhD, finished my PhD. While I was in my PhD program, we adopted a child, and we had a third one. And so we've got kids spread out. My oldest is 31, and my youngest is 17 almost. So we've got them spread out. Yeah, we've almost got two families. But it's kind of fun because they keep us interested in doing things. So so we, we were here in Nebraska, and I got done with graduate school, and my dad lives down the road, and he decided to run for the legislature, and he had me run his campaign. This was back in 2006. I was already serving on our local school board, and he asked me to run his campaign. I did, and I'd kind of forgotten how much I enjoyed kind of grassroots politics, and the actual doing more than just teaching about it. And so he lost, but we had a good time. And over the course of the next 8 years, I did some blogging. I worked in the Ron Paul campaign in 2008 here in Nebraska, and then again in 2012. And I think that, it was probably, that first step into politics again with my dad, and then the Ron Paul campaign that sort of reminded me of the political views that I had. I mean, I was always sort of libertarian, but I think those became more firm during that time. And in 2000, sometime in 2013, our state senator, state legislator, we got a one-house legislature, was getting ready to retire. We've got term limits here in Nebraska, and I really hadn't thought much about it. I was kind of content being on the local school board. It didn't involve much time, and I could still teach and things like that, and still had a young child at the time. And my dad just messages me one day, and he says, "How about Senator Ebke?" And I knew what he was talking about, and I kind of laughed it off. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, it just kind of kept eating at me. And I thought, I'm just about, I've been on the school board for 12 years, and my term will be coming up, and maybe it's time to do something else. So I thought, well, if I'm ever going to run for anything else, now's the time to do it. So in 2013, I announced that I was going to run. And I was still a registered Republican, and I was supported by the Republican Party, although Nebraska's legislature is not only one house, it's also officially nonpartisan. So when you're in the legislature, we don't organize by party. And so, and that's a key component to the success that I had somewhat later. So we don't organize by party. So I ran, won in 2014, and served my first 2 years in the legislature. It's a 4-year term. I served my first 2 years as what I would say is a liberty Republican, a libertarian Republican, or a libertarian leaning Republican, or something like that. And got into a little bit of trouble with the Republican establishment. The governor was not happy when I voted to repeal the death penalty. He was not too happy when I voted in favor of driver's licenses for DACA recipients. Seems like there was something else too, but we did a lot of things those first 2 years. Civil asset forfeiture in Nebraska largely went away as a state law. And so it was kind of a big 2 years. And then I went to the state Republican convention in 2016, after having gone to the Libertarian state convention that invited me to come and speak, because I guess I was the closest thing to an elected Libertarian that they could find. And I went to the state Republican convention, and the governor stood up and called a bunch of us out by name, those of us who had voted against him on some of those things. And I was fortunate because when I had been at the Libertarian Party convention, one of their officers, kind of sidled up to me while we were having lunch, and he said, "Senator, if you ever decided to change, we'd be happy to have you." Okay, whatever, this was in April. By the end of May, I had made the switch. I was sitting at the Republican convention. I'd always liked Gary Johnson, so that didn't hurt that the Libertarians were getting ready to nominate him. And I wasn't real thrilled with Donald Trump, but the straw that broke the camel's back was the fact that the governor stood up and called us out and said that it's time to start electing more platform Republicans, and was foreclosing any independent thought by what used to be a big tent Republican Party. So I spent two years as a libertarian in the legislature. My colleagues were very, in many ways, it allowed me to get some things done that I might not have been able to get done otherwise, because my Republican colleagues said, yeah, that's okay. We knew that's what you were anyhow. And my Democrat colleagues kind of liked the fact that I had been willing to leave the Republican Party. So we got some occupational licensing reform done. And that sort of led me to where I am today. I'm at, after I lost my reelection bid in 2018, I was offered a job with the Platt Institute, which is a free market think tank here in Nebraska. And I have been serving as their, started out as a senior fellow for job licensing reform. I've taken on sort of the broader term of just senior fellow, and they let me do things in other regulatory arenas as well. So that's kind of how I got from here to there. Today, I am also the Libertarian, one of the Libertarian National Committee at-large members. Was just elected back in July, so I've been around.
Nice. I mean, I think it's even funnier saying platform Republicans given the recent circumstances where they decide not to have a platform.
Yeah, well, and I think that's exactly right. And the thing is that, a platform, and I, honestly, some of my libertarian friends disagree with me on this, I think, but, a platform is it represents a moment in time. It represents the will of the body at a particular moment in time. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in the party is going to agree on every single thing, nor does it mean historically that every single office holder in the party is going to agree on every single thing. And, I think that at some point we have to say, okay, do we agree on most things, and are you willing to identify with us? And if we agree on most things, I mean, there aren't all that many things that should be deal breakers, and unless you want to grow the government or, raise taxes. I mean, I'm not sure what else should be a deal breaker, because thoughtful people can disagree around the edges on a lot of issues.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So tell me just a little bit about your thoughts on it's Women's Equality Day. We're bringing lots of new voices into the party. It's interesting to see the Libertarian Party grow. What are your thoughts on how we've helped with women's equality with the movement, and kind of where we have work to do and where we can go?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I noticed when I joined the party 4 years ago is that there did seem to be sort of an absence of vocal women in the party. I think in the last 4 years that's changed some. I see a lot more women in leadership positions, obviously, and maybe what I had seen 4 years ago was more a function of what was going on in Nebraska at the time. But certainly I see women much more active in the party. I think that we need to find ways to reach out to women. Sometimes I think that libertarians, we almost sound mean or selfish, and I think that that's not as appealing to sort of the I'll call them, for lack of a better term, the soccer moms. The moms who, the moms who are taking care of the kids may be very libertarian in some ways, but they don't necessarily, they don't like sort of the rough edges. So I think that, softening our message, bringing more women out to talk about why they're involved in the liberty movement like y'all are doing today, is a great way to, step forward. And frankly, I think that Jo Jorgensen as our nominee is a tremendous asset in terms of bringing more women into the party.
Yeah, she's a very interesting candidate to have outside of gender. But what are your thoughts on the Let Her Speak, and how powerful would that be as somebody who knows a little bit more about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a great movement. I've been tweeting about it for a while, from time to time, and I think that the whole notion that women need to be allowed to speak. I was I was in the legislature for 4 years, and I was on a school board for 12 years. And I grew up in a family that allowed that, women were obviously allowed to speak. I was the oldest child and the oldest grandchild, and I got to say plenty. I can't say that, I ever was deliberately silenced or told that I couldn't talk or anything like that. But by the same token, I think that women are, or have been, in the past, conditioned a little bit to sort of, sit back and let others do the talking, or and maybe part of that is because we tend to be better listeners. And so maybe it's just easier for us to listen rather than jump right in and talk. But I think that there is a decreasing in terms of interpersonal communications. There's certainly a decreasing number of men who are inclined to stifle women. But I think there is some institutional problems, and I think whether or not we can get Dr. Vincent on a debate stage is a big issue.
It's certainly an issue, and it's one that be really interesting to hear her different side of the voice, because it's like in America right now, we all want to kind of yell, but it's almost important to step back and kind of listen to what's been going on, because there are a lot of real grievances you fought with civil asset forfeiture.
Absolutely, and I think that I've had the opportunity to talk to her a couple of different times, and I think that she would make be a very compelling contrast on the stage. She is a soft-spoken and very intelligent person. She's obviously strong, a strong woman, and so she would. I think she would give President Trump and Vice President Biden a real run for their money, and that very well may be why, one of the reasons why, they're kind of ignoring her presence out there. The debate commission really ought to be pressured. I mean, they can have their standards and so forth, but they really ought to be pressured into letting anybody who has the ability to win, meaning if you're in enough state, if you're on the ballot in enough states so that you could win 270 electoral votes, the debate commission really ought to look into ways that they can get more folks on and make it a meaningful debate.
Well, I think that's what the Gary Johnson campaign really started pushing once he kind of gave up on trying to win an election, was the commission on the presidential debates.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see it re-wrapped up in not necessarily the feminist language, but the let her speak. I think it's just useful at this cultural times, because it's still a big ongoing battle libertarians have been fighting for decades now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that sometimes you have to take advantage of these kind of social movements when they happen. And sometimes we're going to be a little uncomfortable with it, because you're right. I mean, this is something that libertarians and other third parties have been fighting forever. I mean, Ross Perot got on, and then they created the Presidential Debate Commission because things were too fair, I guess.
The League of Women Voters said they wouldn't host it with the new rules.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, I think that we need to figure out a way to have meaningful debates that aren't controlled by the two parties, and that's if you can't if their standard is you have to be polling at 15%, then you have to be included in the polls in order to even have a chance to do that, and that's one of those things that libertarians are certainly have problems with, but even beyond that, the fact that we are having that we have a woman who is certainly qualified, I think that makes a great case for us to spend as much time as we can trying to promote her presence on the debate stage.
So what do you think some of the main issues that are facing women today that basically the liberty movement can help with? What barriers can we there's a lot of different fronts. I think it's interesting to hear where different people think priorities should be put.
Yeah, I think this is probably a lot depends on, your age and where you are at different stages in life. And that's something that libertarians also need to, kind of get a grip on in terms of our messaging. We need to understand that different people at different points in their life care the most about different things. I mean, certainly one of the things that keeps a lot of women out of, kind of political involvement is if they are, at the stage of their life where they are, early married, having kids or whatever. Child care is a huge issue. It is, it's been 15 years since I've had, a child in daycare, but, it was a huge issue for me then when I was just teaching classes 3 days a week. It is a huge issue for my oldest daughter, who has a 3-year-old child, and they have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with our daughter if we have to be at work and COVID comes around again, mm-hmm. and they close down all of the preschools, I mean, it becomes very complicated. So that's certainly an issue. I think that in some areas, especially urban areas, I think things like the Black Lives Matter movement, the issue of police overreach and things like that are a big issue. Criminal justice reform. I think things that I would have never thought about when I was in my 20s and early 30s are much more important to my daughter's generation, who they've grown up in a different era, and so they are concerned about a lot of these issues. Even I'm old and I'm a former Republican, but even things like the environment. I mean, when I thought about the environment, I always thought about my Girl Scout days, and leave the campsite better than in better condition than you found it. I think that many in kind of a younger generation, my daughter, for instance, has become vegan, and has for a couple of years now, and trying to be open. People need to be open to some of those to some of those lifestyle choices as well. And so, I mean, there's just a ton of different things that women of different ages have to deal with, and that's just kind of my supposition of what happens for younger women, for people my age, who are looking ahead to maybe retiring someday. Trying to figure out how we keep an economy strong enough so that the things the stuff that we've put away doesn't decrease in value, so we don't have massive inflation and that sort of thing. So I mean, there's all sorts of issues, and I think that libertarians would be well served as they're trying to get votes. And one of your speakers earlier was talking about the nice little small group, but ultimately we got to win some elections. And if we don't win some elections, we aren't in a position to actually change policy. And so I'm a big believer that we've got to try to figure out how to win elections. And one of the ways you win elections is by listening and trying to figure out how to adapt. There's nothing in the libertarian policy that people should be hostile to. We just have to figure out how to message it to them so that it's important to them.
Well, there's definitely been a rebranding of liberty, and where we get kind of the harsh capitalist side. I think libertarians definitely need to talk more about how this empowers, especially poor people, more than anything else. Because other than that, we have monopolies. And on the social side, like you said, there's a lot of different issues that pull people's heartstrings very differently. The libertarians have a pretty big arsenal. It's just hard to use sometimes because there's a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, and I think that we need to grant each other, within the libertarian movement, we need to grant each other a certain level of grace. I mean, I always tell people that, for instance, the question of, abortion, and, get, to touch the third rail, I guess. The question of abortion is one that reasonable people can disagree on, and it all comes down to, when what's the appropriate role of government, and at what point is a life worthy of protection. And that's something that, we don't have any way of knowing. That's something that's kind of outside of our pay grade. And so at some level we have to leave it to, pro-choice folks need to understand that pro-life folks are not anti-liberty just because they want to protect a life. And, pro-life folks need to understand that pro-choice folks aren't trying to be murderers just because, just because they don't, because we have different definitions, and we have different perspectives on, when the life is worthy of protection. And so maybe we can all agree that the best thing to do is just to keep government out of it. And let people figure it out for themselves. And, that's a tough one to get to for sure. But that's one of those issues that I think is worthy to, worthy to consider how we're going to message it and how much we're going to attack each other when we disagree.
Interesting. So if you were going to give advice to new women that want to get involved with the party, want to help out, maybe want to run for office, what do you think? How would you reach out, and how could you help them?
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm always excited to talk to women who are interested in running for office, because I think that my history is such that I've got some helpful hints that I can provide, so people can always get in touch with me, and my email is just Laura@lauraebke.com.
Complicated?
You can. No, it's not too complicated. And then, I can be found on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter. It's just Laura_Ebke, I think, on Twitter. So I'm easy to find. But beyond that, I think that local offices where it's at for libertarians in the short term. I think that I'm a big believer. What are the As a general rule, what did the R's and the D's do? They build their bench. They elect people to school boards and to city councils and to county boards and then to local legislatures. And it's really fairly rare that and unless it's somebody that's got just a whole bunch of money, like our governor, and unless it's somebody like that, it's really rare that you have somebody that just kind of, appears out of nowhere, having never had any sort of electoral experience before, that gets elected to, a higher office. And the same is certainly true with, with congressional seats. So if we want to, over the long term, have a voice in Congress and ultimately elect a president, we need to figure out how to have enough of a bench that we've got people that can, that can go to, that can run for the next level of office and say, hey, yes, I'm a libertarian, but I served for 4 years on this board, or I've served for 8 years on this city council. And all you got to do is ask my constituents. I'm not a fire breather. I'm not a demon. I believe in, in good governance and, protecting your tax dollars, or, whatever the message is that you need to take to your constituents. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, Laura, do you have anything else you'd like to say? We have Lauren back on. How you doing, Lauren?
Laura, this has been great. Hurricane Laura notwithstanding, you certainly brought the power for us today. And, I'll share from my perspective as maybe not a young woman, but, younger, that I did not have early role models to look up to in terms of women I saw in local offices or around me who were even running for campaigns. And so perhaps if I had had those role models early on, maybe instead of starting a nonprofit or a super PAC, I would have run for office.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, I said that my first electoral experience was as a school board member. My mom back in the 70s was president of our local school board, and she'd run for school board. My dad had been our mayor. So, I mean, my family was deeply steeped in politics. So it never occurred to me not to, that I couldn't. Or that I shouldn't, run for election.
Not right.
And so, and my mom did it while she was pregnant with my youngest brother. So it is indeed possible, and women you just need to figure it out. How you're gonna manage things. It takes a little more planning, but it is certainly it's certainly something worthwhile to do, and it's great to get women's voices because women do think differently than men.
Absolutely. Laura, thanks again so much for joining us, and I hope that you've helped to set the stage for other women who are maybe considering it or toying with the idea of what that might look like in their lives. So we appreciate you saying yes on Twitter and being here with us.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Laura.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Laura.